welcome to Chautauqua People. Today we have a very special guest, Jon Nakamatsu, a classical pianist, a native of California, who performs all over the world with some of the best orchestras and chamber ensembles. Jon is also co-director of the Cape Cod Chamber Music Festival in Massachusetts, and he is married. Mr. Nakamatsu has a prodigious technique. I knew I would get over that word. Prodigious technique, and a huge repertoire for the piano, according to several critics. In 1997, he became the first American to win the gold medal in 16 years at the Cliburn International Piano Competition. Jon, it's really a pleasure to have you here today. Thank you so much for coming.
Thank you. It's great to be here.
When did you first start playing the piano, or first start studying the piano, and with whom did you study?
Well, I started formally when I was 6 years old. I actually wanted to play earlier when I was 4. I saw a piano in the preschool that my parents took me to.
Preschool?
Yeah, 4 years old. And I just thought it was the most incredible thing, you know, this big box, and it probably was a horrible piano, but the teacher would play and all the kids would sit around and sing. And it was really kind of off limits to us. I mean, we weren't allowed to touch it. And I remember one time going up there and just hitting the last key, and I got in trouble and had to sit in the corner or something because I touched the piano. And I thought, wow, if it's that great a secret, maybe I should learn this. So I started asking my parents for a piano, and they bought me a little organ when I was 4 years old, and I think they still have it in their garage somewhere. And I played with that for 2 years, and when my parents saw that I was still interested and able to do things like play tunes off the radio and hear music and just figure it out, right, they said, okay, well, maybe we'll give this person piano lessons. You know, they're not musical in any way. They love all types of music, but weren't necessarily involved in classical music.
Right.
And my teacher, really, I came to her. Her name was Marina Derryberry, and she was a private piano teacher, and her husband was my father's colleague as engineers. And that's the only reason I came to her. And the odd part about it was that she was my first teacher when I was 6 years old and taught me my first notes, and accompanied me to competitions some 20 years later as an adult. So
wow.
We had an incredibly wonderful long run together.
Close relationship of
that.
Yeah,
very much so.
That's really wonderful.
Yeah.
So you were the first pianist in your family, is that right?
Yes, the first, and the first person who really learned the piano. I mean, my mother wanted to play the piano when she was young, but they didn't have any money, and she went across the street and learned from a friend, and that was her exposure to it. But my father's family didn't have access to a piano, and but they did play other instruments, especially Japanese ones, and my grandfather, whom I never knew, apparently taught himself to play the violin and sang, and actually played also a sanshin, which is an Okinawan instrument, with his friends. So I think music is genetic somewhat, and even though it wasn't developed in any type of Western tradition, it was definitely in my family.
What was the first piano that your parents bought, or did they buy a piano for you?
Yeah, they bought one when I was 6. In fact, when I started taking lessons, it was called an Everett. And I think it was made by the parent company might have been Hamilton. And anyway, in those days, there were so many different piano companies.
Was it a spinet?
I think it was called a console.
A console. Yeah,
there were all these different classifications.
They're still
I'm not
around,
sure.
Everett's.
Yeah, but it was a great piano. And when I was 10, they traded it in for a grand. And that maker was Schimmel. But I never knew what happened to that first piano. I really wish I could trace back and find it, because I have some wonderful memories of having that in their living room.
Oh yeah, we all enjoyed the first piano that we played is it's like the first love, or first girlfriend, or something like that. So that's really great. I know that you went to school, but not necessarily for music. You ended up going to college to Stanford nearby, just a local college, right?
Right.
Stanford University, and you majored in German studies instead of music. How come German rather than music?
Well, again, I was very fortunate to find in this particular teacher somebody who was able to teach a child his first notes and to then ground a child in the basics of not only just fundamental technique, but also the theory, the harmony, the whole everything. And then as I became more serious, she started to find other people for me to work with in different disciplines in composition. I studied with Leonard Stein of the Schoenberg Institute at USC.
Right.
From the time I was 12, we used to go down there once a month and have a 6-hour lesson. And
all the way down to Los Angeles?
All the way to LA, fly down there, fly back, and in one day I started taking lessons with Carl Schnabel, who was the son of Arthur Schnabel, the great pianist.
Famous, right.
And you know, for many different reasons. So in a way, I was having this private, a very focused conservatory type education, which then freed me up to do other things in college. And one of the things that we thought is that if I were to not major in music, I could major in something that was related. And one of my life's goals, of course, was to learn a language well. Because I'd go to these piano competitions and all these competitors would be speaking multiple languages,
right.
And here I was with English and rudimentary Japanese. That helps nothing. So I started with French and German and then did some Italian and Russian, and I had to pick one when I went to college. And I thought German for two reasons. One, I loved grammar, and that was a great grammar language. And two, the core repertoire of the piano is Central European. And I thought that if there was any discipline that could help in music interpretation, it would be that. So the language, the literature, the culture, art, it all came in very handy.
Oh, that's great. That's great. And then I know you got a bachelor's and a master's degree from Stanford, a master's in teaching, right?
Right.
And I know you enjoy teaching very much.
I do.
Is there any kind of similarity between teaching German and teaching music to students?
Well, it's hard to know because I'm sure there is. I trained really as a classroom teacher, you know, so, and I did that. I was a high school German teacher for 6 years while I was going away to compete and study music and try to make a career that way. But, you know, when you're taught a methodology or you're taught a way of teaching, which in my case was classroom, going to a situation where you were working with one person one-on-one in a completely different discipline is very, very foreign in some way. So when I started teaching music, and I only did this really after I started touring in 1997, I felt very uncomfortable, even though I knew music, I think, better than anything else in my life, and I knew what it was like to study as a student.
Right.
I never really learned how to teach it. And I think that is something that you either learn or pick up through experience. And so for me, I feel like I'm learning every day how to better communicate my ideas to a student, and how we have this kind of discussion as the lesson progresses. And part of music teaching, especially in Chautauqua, is our public classes, where you are actually engaging a student with an audience. And that's a different thing than a private lesson, because you then really also have to remember that there are people there who are of varying experience with music and with the educational side of it. And so you can't completely forget them even as your focus is on the students. So that's another art as well. So it's all part of the same game, I guess.
Right. Now I know the Van Cliburn gold medal win for you was a very big deal, but did you enter some other competitions before the Van Cliburn? Did you get some experience in competing before?
I started very young. I entered my first competition, I think, when I was 7.
Wow.
You know, just a little audition. The local music teachers set up these events, and so I got my feet wet very early, and gradually things got bigger and bigger until by my late teens I was already going to international competitions, and by my early 20s traveling abroad to these events, most of which I lost, you know, because nothing was really happening for me in terms of competitions. Every so often I'd get a prize or I'd get some opportunity to play. And I think the main thing was that from these events you had the experience of playing more and more in public, and you would make connections. So even as a loser, you could gain something quite valuable.
I know you did some sort of a video, something that's on YouTube called the Losers Club. Is that right?
Well, it's a
Some talk that
speech.
you gave?
Yeah, it's a talk. It's I was asked as a jury member of a piano competition to speak at one of the eliminations. And for those people who don't know how competitions work, they usually start with a number of people, and they go through rounds, and at each round there's a certain number who get eliminated,
right.
and only a certain few go on.
Right.
And I was asked to talk a little bit about that, and so what came out was this speech about how many competitions I've lost, and how that actually was a positive thing, and
Sure.
how much I learned through losing and maybe wouldn't have learned through winning. But
It's true that we learn more from our losses than we do from
Absolutely.
Winning. That's true.
But winning is good too. So.
It's much better. It's much better.
Yeah.
Somebody once said it's the only thing, but no, it's much better.
Yeah.
How did you feel, though, when that moment came at the Van Cliburn, this very big international competition, really famous competition, when your name was called and you found out you won the gold medal? How did that feel?
Well, first, it's every 4 years, and I had entered 4 years earlier and just sent in the basic screening application, and I was rejected right then, so I never even went to the competition 4 years prior.
So this is your first time?
It was my first time at the Van Cliburn and my last chance, because I was 27 when I entered, and the age limit is 30. So the next time I was going to be too old, and I knew that I was almost near the end of my rope for any competitions, because that's the major ones end for at the late 20s or early 30s.
Right.
When I got in, I was so excited, because I was going to go to a place that I knew from television, from knowing
Sure.
About the Van Cliburn since I was very young, and I didn't know what to expect, but I did know that being there was at least a chance.
Sure.
I never expected to even get out of the first round, because when I played it, I didn't feel I played my best, and I was listening to many of the other competitors and thinking, this is a really strong field.
Right.
Maybe I should just go back home, and I had all my German papers to grade. I was doing that at the competition, so. But then I somehow got out of the second round, got into the third round, got into the finals, and there are 6 of us in the finals, and at the award ceremony, they do the Miss America thing, where they
Right.
start with the 6th and go all the way to
5th, 4th, 3rd, 2nd, and finally.
until there are 2 of you left.
Wow.
And at that moment, you think, my life is going to change.
Yeah.
And when they called somebody else for the second prize, I just couldn't believe it. It was like just the culmination of years of trying and rejection,
Right.
and wonderful successes with people who supported me.
Sure.
So that moment was, I think, most poignant for my teacher, as she was even there, and my parents, who were hanging on every notice from the competition,
I bet.
and all the people who supported me. So it was just unbelievable, and I wouldn't be sitting with you if
Right,
it weren't
probably.
for that moment.
I'd be happy to talk to you no matter what, even
Well,
if you
thank
didn't
you.
win the
That's
Van
very
Cliburn,
nice.
really.
That's very kind of you.
But the impact of that must have been just incredible. Now, you played the Rachmaninoff Third Piano Concerto for your final.
That was the last piece.
The last piece that you
last
played, the
piece.
one that was judged on
Right.
the most. So, and I know you've played the Rachmaninoff Third a lot. Is that one of your favorite concertos now to play?
It was always one of my favorite pieces. I remember when I was young and I heard the piano concerto for the first time. I was probably about 9 years old, 10 years old. And I remember before that I had only loved the Tchaikovsky concerto. I thought there was no other concerto besides the Tchaikovsky. And then I heard Horowitz's recording of the Rachmaninoff and thought, wow, there's no other concerto besides the Rachmaninoff 3.
Right.
And I remember buying the score and looking at it and reading through the first few pages and then turning the pages, and it was black with notes.
Right.
So I just closed the book and put it away, and I thought this would
Very
never
fast
happen.
notes.
But,
I mean,
yes.
it's tough, yeah.
But so it was a dream for me even to learn it, several years later as a young
Sure.
person, and then to play it with the first, a second piano as the orchestra, and then the first time I got to play it with a full orchestra was when I was in college with the
Wow.
Stanford Symphony.
Really?
That was my first time, and the second time was actually at the Cliburn competition about 10 years later.
Wow.
So I didn't have a lot of other practice, but
Wow.
it was something that I always dreamed of playing. So to actually play that at the Cliburn and then win with it, and tour with it ever since has been more than I could have imagined.
Yeah. Somebody once said, what do you do when you've achieved your dreams,
right.
you know, and you certainly have. That's incredible. But what was the impact for you by winning the competition? What did that give you? What opportunities? I know you stopped teaching German, I think.
Right.
But that was the bad thing.
Day,
but what was the good thing? What happened as far as your concertizing is concerned?
Well, a competition opens the door to marketability. I mean, one of the things about the music world is that it's also a business.
Right.
And the business side of it says that, well, talent is one thing, and it doesn't necessarily matter how good you are, because I was playing the same way the night before the award as I was the night
sure.
after. And on the second night, I was able to be sold to all of these presenters around the world because there was a reason for them to sell me. Whereas before, no one would have bought a ticket to a Jon Nakamatsu concert. I mean, who was
They didn't know
this
you,
person?
right.
They didn't know me. And it opens the door to the potential for a career. It doesn't give you a career, and what the competition actually does is give you 2 years of managed concert engagements. And those were largely set up before they even had a winner. But what happened, especially in the United States, was after I won, all the United States presenters wanted to present the United States winner.
Sure.
And so, in a way, that was great for me because
sure.
I got almost double the exposure that I should have. You know, they wanted to have about 50 concerts in the first year for the
wow.
gold medalists, and I was doing over 100
wow.
per season. And they booked all the rest of the seasons, and from
right.
that point I got a manager, and it just continued. So really, it was for that moment and for that event that I'm here now.
Because if you had been from Spain or from another country, you wouldn't have had so many opportunities probably. But being an American, the first American to win the Van Cliburn in 16 years, yeah, everybody was really looking forward to an American winner. That's
especially
great.
because the competition is in the United States. It's the biggest one in our country, and it's in Texas.
Fort Worth, right?
Fort Worth, and that's
yeah.
the home of Van Cliburn, and
right.
you know, you can't get more American than that.
Well, I know one of the highlights for your career was playing in the White House for President Clinton and Mrs. Clinton.
Right.
And what are some of the other personal career highlights that you've had performing?
Well, for me, you know, any performance is a privilege. Again, I never thought that this would be possible. I was prepared to go back to school and go into academics and have a different life if music didn't work out.
Sure.
So every performance to me is something somewhat miraculous. But naturally, you know, there are the lists of the incredible cities and the halls that I've been to, but I have to say some of the most incredible moments have been a little more personal. Like, for example, when I went to Hawaii for the first time as a pianist and not as a family member. Well,
yeah.
no, my parents are from there, and so my relatives all live in Honolulu, and it's a huge number of people. And they were able to come to hear me play
sure.
for the very first time
live
when
yeah.
I went there, and that was really meaningful.
Oh, sure.
Because they always knew I played the piano, but they didn't really know
I know.
what I did. And for my grandmother to be in the audience, and you know,
Oh,
it was really wonderful.
That's exciting. Having met just a couple of your relatives, I know how much they enjoy hearing you play.
They're so sweet and so
It's
supportive.
amazing. I was looking at the list of places that you've performed. You played at big places like the Hollywood Bowl and Vail and Tanglewood and Carnegie Hall. I mean, really famous places. But you also played at a lot of small towns, in libraries. You've played a lot of places, which I think is wonderful that you've given so many people pleasure, even in small venues, in small towns where they might not be able to hear a big concerto. So I think that is great.
Sometimes those are the most exciting places to play, because you know, when you go to a big city, you're kind of one of 1,000 things that are happening in the city. But when you go to a place where the whole town will show up for something that, you know,
right.
maybe in another place people wouldn't really show up. You know, the excitement and just the level of, sometimes
yeah.
the level of sophistication is surprising.
Sure.
And I like playing in all different places, and smaller halls sometimes are even more reflective of the music that we play. You know, a lot of this recital, solo piano or chamber music wasn't really meant to be played in 3,000-seat auditoriums. Right. We were really supposed to hear it in
smaller
100-seat venues,
right.
you know, or even smaller. So
right.
They're all really great experiences for
sure.
me.
And now, because of our technology, we have these wonderful CDs. I know you've made, I think, more than a dozen albums, I think, and I know your album with the Rochester Philharmonic, with the Gershwin Rhapsody in Blue and the Concerto in F, have been big sellers. I think they reached to #3 on the Billboard chart. Something, a classical piece reaching to #3 on Billboard. That sounds great. And I know you've also recorded the Rachmaninoff Third Piano Concerto and the Rhapsody on theme Paganini as well.
Right.
Yeah. So folks, go out there and buy some CDs. You know, I mean, we got to keep John in business
That's
here.
Right.
No question. So I know it's a little strange, but is there any place that you haven't performed yet that you would like to perform? Some place that you've always dreamt of performing? Some place you'd like to play the piano?
There are many, many, many places, but one, simply because I want to go there, is Australia. I've never gone to Australia. I've been all over Asia, I've been all over Europe, South America, but Asia would be wonderful. I think Africa would be wonderful. You know,
Sure.
I think there are certain places on the planet that where music is maybe not the prime art form, but it is one of the many growing ones.
Sure.
And I would love to just see all of them.
I think we need to talk to Grant Cooper and get you a gig.
That would be fun.
In New Zealand and Australia, because I think he could make it happen.
Well, he's the person, I guess.
Yeah, he should. Well, what do you think about Chautauqua? You've been now here at the Chautauqua Institution for a couple of years.
Right.
I think this is what, your third year?
It's my third year.
Your third year,
Yeah.
and you're working with our piano students. We have a video that we made of you working with one of our piano students, a woman named Wei Wei, and I got a chance to see you in master classes. Really wonderful opportunity to see you working with one of our female pianists, and I must say that she really got a lot out of it, and the audience there, the people that were in the room, also got a lot out of it. What's it like for you teaching a master class? How do you enjoy that?
It's fun. It's a different. Again, we spoke about this. It's a slightly different thing than teaching in a private situation, because again, you have an audience to engage as well, and what you say has to transmit or mean something to people who aren't necessarily as skilled or as knowledgeable as a student. But I think that students can gain something from that. You know, I mean, it's also just sitting there and playing in public and being criticized. You know, I remember doing this as a student myself and thinking, gosh, this is terrifying and horrible. But I think you learn a little bit about performing and about audiences and about what it is to just feel exposed and to be okay with it.
Right. You can actually look on the screen and see yourself performing in a master class right now with one of our female students.
Oh.
That was really a wonderful time. And I know the students really enjoy your comments and your suggestions, and I'm sure you help make them better pianists.
Well, I always learn something when I teach. You know, what's interesting is that until you turn it around where you are actually presenting the material to somebody else, you don't really consider it in the same way. Even as a classroom teacher, I felt that I learned the material better when I had to reorganize it, not in terms of a receiving body, but as the one who had to disseminate this information. I love the fact that we as musicians get the chance to interact in this way, because I think it's a two-way street. It's not just about transmitting your ideas to somebody. It's seeing how somebody actually reacts with them, and sometimes they don't work. And that also then causes me to reevaluate some of the things that I say and how I say that, because we really are just looking for a common language to speak about these issues.
That's great. That's really good. The students, we have, what, about 24 students at Chautauqua, and I know that we have different master teachers, but it just seems to me we have so many students from so many different colleges. It's just a wonderful place for students to grow and to learn. And we have a wonderful piano program, and I just hope that the future of the piano program will continue to be something that you'll be interested in working with.
It's a great pleasure. We love this place, and the piano program is just, it's really, really something special. I love working with the students, and as you say, I think there's a little bit of the Chautauqua ideal in this piano program, in that it's a place where students not only have the opportunity to hone their craft, but they can see how it relates to the rest of the art world. I mean, every discipline is represented somewhere in Chautauqua, and
that's right.
That's a great, great opportunity for them. Some of them don't get that if they're in places that are so focused on just music. It's really tremendous here.
It is. It's a very unusual program, but you know, we have so much going on. We have drama students, we have students in art, wonderful art quad with about 30 students there. We have dance students. We have students really in every field. It's an amazing place. It really is. Let me give you a kind of an open-ended question here, just to think about for about a minute and a half or so. I feel really strongly about the importance of classical music. I love all music, but how do you feel about classical music as far as its future is concerned? What do you think about the future of classical music?
Well, I think like all art, you know, things become different. Things become relevant to the people who participate. And while we always complain about declining audiences, numbers, concerts disappearing, more and more people trying to become classical artists, in a way it's hopeful when you see the number of people who want to play and the number of people who are still interested. And I think, you know, the relevance is what we make of it. It's the same question, you know, will Shakespeare be around, you know, in 100 years? And my guess is yes, not because of the people who are interpreting Shakespeare, it's because these works are intrinsically great. And I think the masterworks which survive the test of time, you know, classical music from the past and that which is being created now, you know, the time is the great filter through which all of this passes. And what ends up at the other end is not really for us to decide, but I think will endure simply because it's worth studying and hearing.
Right. So just because, just as Shakespeare is enduring, and people continue to learn and study Shakespeare, you think Beethoven, Brahms, Chopin, Rachmaninoff will continue to endure, and their music will continue to endure. Certainly hope so. John, it's been really a pleasure having you on Chautauqua People. I can't thank you enough.
Thank you. It's my pleasure.
Thank you so much for coming today. Jon Nakamatsu is known as a great classical pianist and is a man with small hands but a big heart. And I can attest to John's down-to-earth personality. As a wonderful personality, certainly is a favorite with audiences. So it's been a pleasure for us to have you on Chautauqua People today, and we look forward to your next performance, whether it's here at Chautauqua, in New York City, or somewhere else. But thank you again, and thank you, and keep watching Chautauqua People. Goodbye now.